everyone. Welcome back to another edition of Outdoor Hospitality Weekly. I'm Alex Burkett, joined as always by Matt Whittemore. And today we got a great episode, Matt. We're kind of going back to our roots from episodes past, talking about a familiar name. This time with some new news, coupled with some other great stories. We'll be talking about Wi-Fi, some branding efforts with Secret Creek, and your conversation with John Gibson. There is a lot on the roadmap today, so let us kick it off here with the one big thing this week, which you got a lot of traction on social media, and we've had a lot of kind of interesting conversation trafficked in the industry regarding Under Canvas and their kind of announcement of two different openings and maybe a little bit of a departure from their national park strategy. Matt, so give us just some background on these kind of two locations that are opening up, and what do you think this says about where Under Canvas has been conventionally, and kind of where do they go from here?
Yes, Alex. I think this is a fun one. I posted on LinkedIn, right, to tease this, and it created a little bit of engagement and back and forth. And so to set the stage, Under Canvas, one of the leaders in the industry, private equity, KSL Capital Partners got involved with them years ago.
Yeah, I think this was 2018.
2018, they've injected a bunch of money into the business, expanding and improving sites, acquiring new sites. And so a little bit of a trend here, which is their prerogative. And, we'll dive into how I analyzed it and really what my intent was, because I'm not sure that totally came across. But so they opened Columbia River Gorge in May of this year, and then just was announced that White Mountains in New Hampshire is opening in June 2026. And so those are both not near national parks, where historically every other Under Canvas property is near a national park, except for another interesting kind of tidbit here is, right, they acquired the Fields of Michigan and Bar and Ranch under an Outdoor Collection brand. Another interesting note there I want to touch on, but Bar and Ranch is near Yellowstone, but the Fields of Michigan is not near a national park, so it's now three. Shout out to Brian Octorloni for pointing that out, because it slipped my mind as I was writing the newsletter. But we did talk about it on a prior podcast, because that was big news when it happened. So we've got three properties now that are not national park oriented, and I wrote that. Is this, is it a risky pivot? Analyzed a little bit of what it means to depart from the national park model. Now, really my intent was to spark the conversation, so I guess it worked, and just kind of open up the commentary, because whether you're in the campground business, the RV park business, the glamping business, or even like higher end outdoor lodging, there's a clear narrative out there that the national park circuit is a strategy, right? Largely location-wise and market-wise, there's two strategies. There's being close to population centers in major metros. And I want to talk about what close means, because I think that's another piece here that maybe got lost. But major metros or major demand drivers, which is a lot of times national parks. So I just thought it's an interesting trend. And then also I found interesting, just being a New Englander myself and living in upstate New York now, that the short season is such an interesting topic, and it really pushes a lot of investors away, right? So many investors in our space across the spectrum of outdoor hospitality are so keyed in on year-round operations and some level of year-round demand to really get 12 months worth of revenue. And it's no secret that being 3.5 hours north of Boston in northern New Hampshire in the White Mountains, that is a short season, right? I think probably mid-May to mid-October might even be a little bit generous for the operating season. And then peak season might be 2 or 3 months, maybe 4 months. So that was my main takeaway, and the fact that it's 3.5 hours from Boston. Now, I'm not saying that these aren't going to succeed, and I'm not saying I'm smarter than anyone in this industry because I'm not. Not smarter than anyone at Under Canvas. I viewed them as an industry leader. It was more intended to be commentary of look what the industry leader's doing. I think this is going to be splashy and change people's perspectives, and it's an interesting conversation about risk and how we define, proper site selection and what, market selection and all that. So that's where I was intending to take it, and I think it went there, but you sparked some debate. And to anyone not Under Canvas, I'm not trying to undermine what you're doing over there or anything, and big fan, have stayed there. I just think it's going to kind of honestly reshape the trajectory of the industry and make people reevaluate their buy boxes, and all the hotel operators that are getting into this space are going to start to think differently. So kudos to them for being trailblazers.
And Matt, I think you're right. This definitely signals a shift. And there was, kind of an interesting, article back in May in Travel Age West, kind of had some people from Under Canvas in it talking about kind of just the pillars of their brand, what they're, trying to strive for with Under Canvas. And I think this certainly is an expansion of that brand, right? Looking at and saying, our brand is really putting people under a canvas tent. We think that this expands well beyond that national park footprint to more great metros. As you mentioned, the New England location, that is a very, hot touristy market that, although still a short season, there's a lot of activity there, and it gives them, a little bit a presence in an area that they've lacked, right? Someplace in the Northeast. I certainly don't think that this will be, probably the last of their moves in these different metros and areas that they traditionally have not played in the past. And I think we see that in, kind of one of those pillars mentioned in the article was trying to get guests off of the property and off of the park into those natural spaces. And I think, they kind of broadened that definition instead of getting guests off the park to maybe go visit a national park. What is a natural space, right? That's a very broad definitional term as to what that could mean,
right?
In what ultimately that can offer a guest. So, I think, as you said, it's very much a brand play. This is very much kind of, the M&A activity with the two acquisitions definitely showed them being more willing to broaden their focus with more of a collection and less focused solely on national park metros. And as we've seen and we've talked about Doge cuts in past episodes, right, is maybe this, it just creates some uncertainty around national parks. Not that they're still not great areas to be close to, or that, foot traffic and car traffic still isn't great, but I think it just, again, broadens the scope of do we want to be so dependent on something that's maybe 100% government controlled land, right? And what could happen if some of that, let's say, got sold, or travel patterns changed, right? From people maybe traditionally hitting that national park bucket list to now saying we're more open to exploring other regions of the country and other cool spots. So, yeah, right. As you said, I think to me this is definitely an expansion of their brand, based on some of this buying activity and opening activity. Matt, I guess, if we pulled out that crystal ball, where do you think that they could go from here? Like what's next? Are we positioning for a potential sale here? Is this something that you think, as I kind of hypothesized, more openings are going to happen in different places, right? More of maybe that southeastern footprint, or, the Everglades is one that comes to mind, right? Like, could there be an Under Canvas Everglades or something like that? Like, would be a little funky, or would be a little cool, but, what's on the table for Under Canvas given this kind of expansion of their brand?
It's a good question. I mean, there have been rumblings of a sale that I've heard about, which would make sense, right? That's something else I wrote about too. Is it's 7 years since 2018. That's a pretty common private equity hold period. So wouldn't be surprised and have heard those rumors, but I don't have any confirmation or personal knowledge of that. I am not an insider on that one. So. Something else that kind of just dawned on me, right? A few weeks ago, we got the big news about Marriott launching the outdoor collection, and then, reviewing my notes on Under Canvas, they both launched branded outdoor collections within literally called the Outdoor Collection within a few months of each other. So I don't know if that's just big corporate wheels turning and branding team had selected the brand and you can't reverse that, but I probably would have if I saw that somebody else in the space. I mean, it's different models, right? The Outdoor Collection at Marriott is more of a franchise model, and that was all about brands and soft brands and manufacturers and modular units and stuff, whereas at Under Canvas it's locations. So, but interesting thing I took me until this morning to pick up on. But yeah, I mean, I think they're right. Scale is what private equity desires, and it's hard to find good sites around national parks. I think there's no secret to that. So I think at some point you want to scale beyond a pretty niche strategy within a niche and reach 20, 30, 40 locations or more. So I don't know. I mean, maybe there's a rebrand in the future. Maybe that sale does happen and there's a rebrand and it's something broader than Under Canvas. I don't know. I don't have that crystal ball, but I think it's pretty fascinating for our industry, and I'm excited to tune in and follow along, as I'm sure everybody else is.
Yeah, and sort of speaking of this conversation on brand and guest experience, this leads right into our trail map segment. Looking at one of, I would say, Matt, this is a hot button issue that we're going to talk through here for a lot of RVers. This is something that campground owners take very seriously, and we're really talking about Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi complaints, right? If you're a park owner or manager out there, like, who hasn't gotten a Wi-Fi complaint over the last year or two? And it kind of brings up this interesting dynamic is talking through Under Canvas's strategy, right? Getting people, in this really luxury, awesome unit, but to disconnect, right? To be out in nature and kind of be maybe away from that city, right? You're going to go from Boston to this new, New England location. You're going to go from LA out to one of the cool Under Canvas properties. But we do know that there are a lot of folks that are camping, RVing, doing work and life and school on the road. It was estimated in an RVIA survey that back in just 2022, so this is now 3 years ago, 54% of all RVers do some sort of work from the road, whether that's the need to answer emails, the need to hop on calls just like this. We're able to do this podcast because we've got Wi-Fi here at the campground. So the necessity for Wi-Fi coverage has become more important than ever. And Matt, you had a really interesting, thoughtful read on what people can do to kind of prevent some of these Wi-Fi complaints. And, I think this is really just a good conversation to talk about how important Wi-Fi has become, not only to attract RVers and people to your property, but also to retain and make that great 5-star service experience. So do you just want to touch on that and some of the solutions that you were able to come up with?
Sure. Yeah, and this is one that's close to my heart as a traveler and an RVer who's always on the go with need for internet. I've experienced plenty of hardship as a customer at places that don't have internet, or even glamping places I've experienced that paying a lot of money, and they advertise it as a benefit that there's no Wi-Fi, but you don't find that out until you get the booking reminder email, which was frustrating. And I'm no Wi-Fi expert. I'm not an IT guy. This actually comes courtesy and shout out to Charles and Bob at Unhitched, who actually did a webinar on this a little while back that I learned a lot from. And just conversations with Wi-Fi providers, having gone through a couple projects at campgrounds. So still not an expert, but I've picked up a little tidbits here. And, the main idea is that, RVs are not conducive to internet signal, right? The metal, the materials, a lot of times serve to block Wi-Fi signal. And then on top of that, we usually have RVs filled with pretty cheap electronics that have really weak radio signals. So there's a few things you can do, and it's not to, I don't want this to come off like an opportunity or justification to tell your guests that they're wrong about their Wi-Fi complaints, because that's not good hospitality, and two, that's not the intent. The intent is to provide a solution, or at least a path to a solution, or something to investigate that is a pretty quick, easy, cheap fix for probably what causes a lot of Wi-Fi complaints. And that's right, people streaming in their RVs, people working from their computer in their RVs, and they're hooked up to the park Wi-Fi, right? There's a repeater somewhere outside their RV, and it's just not a good signal. So having RV'd a bunch, I always tried to plug in wherever I could. And that's not always possible, but something to always look for. So really the idea is to just have the knowledge that, if you're doing what you're supposed to, if you've done your job as a campground, RV park, or glamping resort Wi-Fi provider, you have a strong signal, you've saturated the signal enough with repeaters, you have enough bandwidth, right? That's a whole nother conversation, which if you're fighting that battle now, definitely reach out. I am not going to be the one to tell you how to fix that, but I can put you in touch with a few people who will be able to tell you how to fix that. So definitely do that. But if you're checking all those boxes and you're confident that you have good infrastructure, you have good service, you've done that all well, there are other things that are going to prevent your guests from getting a good Wi-Fi signal. And that a lot of times comes down to reflected signal, blocked signal by the RV itself, or cheap electronics with cheap Wi-Fi radios. So that's our takeaway for the trail map this week, and I think it's a nice little actionable thing to put in your tool belt, because it is, right. It's such an increasing demand and expectation for guests.
Yeah, I was going to say it's become what's been coined like the fourth utility hookup. Like it's become just as important as your, power, water, sewer, and now internet, right? Like just like you, there are so many people that they won't even stay if you don't even have basic internet coverage, right? It's become that important. And back to the RVIA survey, like, do you really want to miss out on half of the potential RVers that potentially could be coming to your property by not having this? So in some ways it's become a little bit of a, like you have to bite the bullet on the cost to put this in and do it. And we've seen some parks try and go from like, okay, we're going to run basic Wi-Fi for everybody. You might get, 2 megabits upload and download, and you're going to be kind of like capped at that level, and we're going to charge for everything beyond that, right? Of kind of like the business enterprise grade model. And the hotel industry has tried this in the past, and I think somewhat, I would say, and I would argue unsuccessfully, right? Like how would you feel to, as you said, come in, be maybe paying $60, $70, $80 a night for your spot, and then go, oh yeah, and by the way, internet's going to cost you $15 a day to get anything beyond like checking my basic email. Right now, and look, there's that conversation on like how many devices should you allow, and the ability for, let's say, kids to stream video games and stuff. Like I think most people are generally in agreement. Like there can be caps for things like that, but somebody who wants to do work or needs to log in and do school, like you need to be able to provide that kind of basic connection. And I think, Matt, to your point, the solution that you laid out here really helps kind of solve that problem. It's a cheap option that a lot of RVers can put into practice, and it helps kind of position your park as, as you said, doing everything that you can do and being one of the authorities in the industry when it comes to Wi-Fi coverage, because so many parks, I would say, don't do a great job. It's spotty over-the-air coverage. Their speeds aren't where they should be. One solution is running fiber, which is super expensive, and laying the conduit and doing it. And as you said, having direct connection where you can, and like that's great. That solves for a lot of that. But at the end of the day, like as you said, you can't sometimes maybe overcome the way that something was built or how it was set up. And I
Right.
think that this helps kind of bridge the gap between you putting in the best internet as possible and getting the RVer to do and bring the best equipment possible so they
Right.
have the best guest experience.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, my first foray into this was at seasonal campgrounds in the Northeast, where it's pretty common to just have cable service to each site, which, that's so each customer becomes a Wi-Fi, right? They get their own Wi-Fi or cable or phone service even from like the old school cable provider at their campsite, which, right, you
Right.
only have the
You hook
range.
up right at the pedestal. It's just,
Right.
you know,
But you only have the range to right outside your RV because probably your equipment is in the RV, and again it blocks the signal. So you stray too far from your RV, you have no signal, and especially in more remote locations where there's no cell phone service, it also creates kind of a safety concern of like if you don't have that park Wi-Fi, you might not be able to call 911 in the event of an emergency, and that was always something that stuck out with me. So, but the puzzle of like, okay, for somebody to have RV in or to have Wi-Fi in their RV from their own provider, their own account, is actually a pretty good solution for the Wi-Fi in the RV. But for all the reasons I stated, it's not a great like park solution. So like, we've had it at parks where we advertise it, right? And it's an iterative process too, especially in these wooded environments where typically we install it in the winter and we do our best and we test it and we walk around, we do speed tests and try and find the holes and saturate it with more equipment and stuff. And but then the season comes and the trees fill in with leaves and changes the signal, which I never really
welcome
thought.
to over the air Wi-Fi signal.
Yeah,
It's
so like
great.
that never occurred to me until we worked through it, and then like we kind of made the mistake of like, oh, check it out, we're installing Wi-Fi, and then like we didn't saturate it enough, and the customers were like, I canceled my own service because you told me there was Wi-Fi, but it doesn't work inside my RV. Like, and so now they're going back and they have the frustration of I got to sign back up for my service because your Wi-Fi at your campground sucks. So I never thought it was going to be that hard or that complicated to provide good Wi-Fi, right? And I think I'm meeting more vendors in the space. So again, reach out if you're struggling with park Wi-Fi, we'll put you in touch with people who can help you. But I think there's a lot of vendors out there that come and install it, and it's not cheap to get Wi-Fi installed, and right, it's more of like a contractor kind of relationship of they get paid a nice little payday to do the install, and they're not really incentivized or motivated to like make sure the service is good on an ongoing basis. So something to watch out for.
Yeah, and Matt, finally to kind of close out the show today, we're going to jump over to our field notes section, kind of circling all the way back around, talking about branding, right? We kind of kicked off the show with a little bit of a brand shift. This is, I would say, a really positive brand shift that you were able to talk and have a conversation with John Gibson over at Secret Creek, somebody I had the pleasure of meeting back. I think the first time I met John was 2022 at the glamping show. Live in person, we had a chance to talk with John and Garrett, and I did a little interview with them. I think that was first or second year of the glamping show out in Colorado. Really great guy. They've got a really cool product. But Matt, you had another conversation with John, and I learned something new from this conversation. Really hearing from his roots and how Secret Creek kind of came to be. So, do you just want to tell everybody about the conversation you had with John and give some commentary on him, his company, the
Yeah.
rebrand?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. My first contact with John Gibson was actually off of a LinkedIn post. I had heard about him and heard a lot of great things about Secret Creek. I think you and I had even discussed it, but heard from other industry professionals that, really stand up guy, really stand up operation, and finally got the chance to connect with him. But it's funny, I had a post a while back that got a little bit of engagement about my own challenges with a glamping manufacturer. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to post that, and for that exact reason, I was like, I'm gonna want to do business with manufacturers in the future, and I don't want to be labeled as the guy that puts manufacturers on blast in public. And so he had a very thoughtful post or comment on my post about feeling for the manufacturer side, because manufacturing is really difficult, and I totally get that. And so I think he may have started off being a little skeptical of my outlook on things, and hopefully not anymore after a nice chat. But got to meet with him and hear the story of how he came about purchasing the Colorado Yurt Company and rebranding it, and it was just such a refreshing conversation about branding, but authenticity, and kind of an authenticity problem that our industry has in some corners, and I think it's apparent that we have that, and it's a lot of just low barrier to entry relatively to become a glamping manufacturer, and there's a lot of new players in the space that are promising things that they can't deliver, and it was just refreshing to hear from somebody on that side of the industry that has been at it for a while and really has the right outlook, and it's just authentic to who he is, right? His backcountry trips and everything, and I just loved the anecdote about him bringing his pack mule Margie to one of the prior glamping shows.
That was that show in 2022 that Margie was there, and it was really cool. Like, it was,
Yeah.
And to your point, like, you could feel how, like, the booth was different, right? And
Yeah.
in a setting like that, for anybody who hasn't visited the glamping show, everybody, and every manufacturer possible has their unit up. You're trying to sell on quality, on brand. These are ultimately people that you would be in a partnership and a relationship with should you purchase this unit. And John was one of those. And to your point, Matt, it sticks out to me for that reason. I mean, hey, I remembered the date that I met you. Like, it's got to be at least somewhat of a special occurrence. It was one of the most authentic booths that was there. You could feel John and just
Right.
him come out through that. And I think the best brands that are doing things well in our space either are, one, obviously solving a problem, but there's this personal component and this personal thing that ties back to something greater, right? John had this line that you quoted, Matt, in the article of, he would always tell people he's going to Secret Creek behind Secret Ridge near Secret Mountain, right? And everybody's got that own experience. We all likely have that story, if you're a camper or an RVer, of that trip that you took to that really cool place. And I think that's what makes the rebrand so special. He was still able to kind of keep the Colorado Yurt name, but obviously since then they've expanded to add Earthworks teepees, destination tents. They've kind of grown the product catalog, and I think Secret Creek is it's a really authentic, cool name. Great icon and logo, obviously capturing Margie in the icon itself. I mean, it's one of the most kind of cool rebrands and brands that I've seen in a long time.
Right. And I came across the brand just in conversations before really ever knowing anything about John, and the mule struck me as it's such a interesting juxtaposition as to what we see in the industry. And I talked about that with John, about how a lot of people have kind of generic mountains and creeks and landscapes and stuff, but right, there's nothing sexy about a mule. And that might offend some people, who are really hardcore, backcountry trip takers. But a mule is a symbol of hard work and grit, and just getting the job done, and with no frills, and that right. I just think it was a brilliant way to rebrand, and it's different and it separates, but it's also true to like what they are, right? Like yurts have been around for a long time. There's nothing like revolutionary about a yurt or a teepee or like a safari tent, but and I think that right that we have all these new sexy modern things, and I think I've kind of got suckered into it a little bit in my own project, and now I'm regretting it. And I should have just gone with the tried and true classic, yurt company that's been around for decades. Probably would be in a better spot today. So it's food for thought, and it was a really like thought provoking conversation, and felt like it needed to be shared. So glad we had the opportunity to talk about it.
Absolutely. And Matt, with that, I think we'll try and kind of sum up our three segments today and kind of wrap things up. So obviously we kicked off the show talking about Under Canvas, maybe signaling a little bit of a brand shift here. We kind of I would say two themes throughout this episode. We obviously kind of opened and closed the show today talking about branding, really being authentic, looking at, if a strategy shift, right? Taking something that was existing and kind of expanding on that definitionally, if that's something that makes sense, that adds to the authenticity of the brand. I would say obviously with Under Canvas, there's a little bit of this departure of the national park strategy, more of sort of a revitalization of their, under canvas nature packed experiences, and it'll be really interesting to see how they continue to position the company as they kind of get closer to new metros and really grow and expand that brand moving forward. We also talked about Wi-Fi, right? To the guest experience side, looking at, simple solutions and what can be done, trying to get your guests to, I would say, participate in that fourth utility hookup a little bit more, right? Getting good Ethernet cables, USB connections, helping improve their radio signals, right? These are all things, and I think an educational opportunity that we can do as the industry to kind of hold up our end of the bargain, but make it a much better guest experience for all of our RVers and visitors who come see our properties. And then finally, as we just ended talking about John and Secret Creek, really one of the most cool stories about staying authentic, being a really, I keep going back to Matt, like John is just such a great guy. Like I still, every person that I've ever heard say anything about John, whether it's competitors, people in the industry, like John's just a really cool dude. And he's got a really cool brand. And I think that's ultimately something that's really aspirational, something we all should be striving for. Find that thing that's not sexy, right? Be authentic, continue to grow that brand in really cool, amazing ways, and I think you'll see the success of something even when, as you pointed out, you don't necessarily have an earth-shattering product. You can be a really cool, authentic, earth-shattering brand. So, I don't know. What do you think? Was that a good summation of today's show?
Yeah. Excited to follow along. I think both Secret Creek, right? We didn't really touch on the fact that they got named as part of the Marriott Outdoor Collection, and that was kind of part of the reason I was posting about that and engaged with John a little bit back and forth. So, I know he's excited about that. I think it opens doors, but also probably creates some challenges and some growth challenges. But from what I've learned about him, he's definitely got the makeup and the right mentality and approach to really crush it. So excited for all the folks at Under Canvas to keep I'd say, I don't know, I think people didn't really like the word pivot that I used, but keep honing their strategy.
It's refinement, right?
Refining and honing their strategy. I think there's a lot of exciting stuff going on for our industry, and it's a lot of fun to chat about with you, Alex. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And with that, we will wrap up this week's show. Hope everybody has a great week. I know I am looking forward to sort of closing out the season here and seeing a lot of our listeners in person at some industry events coming up. Matt, it'll be exciting for us to finally, who knows, maybe we can even do a live show from some of these events. I don't know. Anybody who wants to come in and participate or give us feedback on stories, topics we should talk about. I know we've got a lot of great feedback from folks about this new format, and just really excited to continue diving into stories. So with that, we'll see everybody next week.